start this, I just want to give UCLA their kudos here. I mean, between Jerry Newhousel's play calling, between, Skipper deserves a lot of credit coming in as the interim coach and actually making a statement versus one of the top teams in the country, and just a UCLA team that has just been teetering for a while now, ever since Chip Kelly left to be the Ohio State offensive coordinator and now is the offensive coordinator with the Oakland Raiders. Just give them a big shout out. And especially Nico really kind of came into his own. And, if he does decide to transfer, I mean, this is definitely going to be one of those games where he can definitely market himself to another Power 4 school. But regardless of what you do, if you're UCLA, I mean, this is really just a phenomenal game and effort for them. But let's talk about Penn State for a second here. I mean, there's just so many different things that I can kind of hone in on. I think that's why it took me almost a week to kind of talk about this video because, as people who've watched my program before, I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up a Penn State fan. I grew up about 2.5 hours away from campus. So I've been watching this team really for as long as I can remember with the latter days of Joe Paterno. And, ever since James Franklin has been head coach. And, at least for me, this was definitely not by far, but the most talented Penn State team that I've ever seen, with just the amount of returning production. You have Jim Knowles coming in as your defensive coordinator. Like everything just kind of seemed to be clicking. And, I feel like I've been making so many defenses and justifications for James Franklin and for Penn State. And for me, this kind of felt like the legitimate year where this would kind of all come together. And unfortunately, this loss to UCLA, in essence, pretty much kills their season unless they somehow manage to beat Ohio State on November 1st and then somehow beat Indiana too. Unless both those things happen and they go undefeated for the rest of the season, you can pretty much kiss your playoff chances goodbye. So, I mean, I think there is a shot in the dark if this happens, but to me, there's just so many different things that we can kind of talk about in terms of what's screwing up about Penn State that you don't even know where to start. But I'll talk about them offensively first because there's so many. I just want to have this be somewhat organized here. But offensively, I mean, I'd say first and foremost, shout out to Preston at Trash Talk Tailgate for, bringing this up before. But the reality is that Drew Allard does not have that kind of clutch gene in him. And I think for anybody that watches Drew Allard can sit there and say he has a lot of God-given talent. He has a good arm. He has good vision. He is underrated athletically, and he can also run the ball way better than people think. However, when you get put in these clutch situations in these moments and you force passes, it's just simply unacceptable. Whether you want to talk about the interception last week in overtime versus Oregon, whether you want to talk about the playoff game versus Notre Dame, and even in UCLA where he just didn't really seem, to me, this kind of seems like a game that Drew Allard could quote unquote kind of take over and really kind of show the entire country that, hey, Drew Allard can be a legitimate candidate for a Heisman Trophy. But at the same time, too, Penn State, I mean, they haven't had a great wide receiving core for a number of seasons now. So, I mean, I don't want to make too many excuses for them at all. But at the same time, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as, hey, at the end of the day, Drew Allard is not as good as you think. Or you can look at it and say, Andy Kawanecki and this offensive staff isn't really setting him up for success. And quite frankly, I think there's a couple of reasons to think that I think Andy Kawanecki deserves a lot of criticism for what we saw. I'd say first and foremost, a couple of things that I want to mention. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, your two best players. Katron Allen played on 22 snaps versus UCLA, and Nick Singleton only played 37. So my first question is, why are they only having 20 carries combined on average when those are your two top players? And especially when you go back and I think of that fourth quarter drive where Penn State, is coming back and, potentially going to win this game. Penn State ran 6 plays needing a touchdown, However, they didn't have their best player, Katron Allen, on the field. They ran 6 straight plays and he wasn't on the field at all. So for me, it was just absolutely crazy that they didn't have him out there too. Not to mention on that 4th and 2 play, why are you running a quarterback draw with Drew Aller when you have Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, who were averaging over 6 yards a carry per game? You're trying to sit there and tell me in that situation that Katron Allen, Nick Singleton can't fight for 2 yards in that situation? It just goes to show that, yes, they've been two of the most consistent players throughout their tenure at Penn State, but for some reason they're constantly being underutilized. And Andy Kalinecki's play calling definitely deserves criticism, because you sit there and you say to yourself, when you have that identity, you know what you are, it's noteworthy that they're having this conversation. Now, granted, I think there are some other issues at play besides play calling, even though I think that's a big one. I think their offensive line has been pretty disappointing this season, especially when you go back and you think of how strong Penn State's offensive line was for them. Because, when you look at, Penn State, right now, they're 52nd nationally in terms of them running the football. They're only converting 40% of third downs. So when you sit there and all these kind of things come together, it's really troubling, and quite frankly, it's really a little bit overwhelming. There's a couple stats that I think are noteworthy to throw out there too. Total offense, Penn State ranks 69th in the country. Explosive play offense percentage, 41st. Third down rate, 71st. Completion percentage, 51st. And then rushing offense, 52nd. When you have that much talent on the field and you're ranking 52nd in the country in terms of running the football, it's as inexplicable and inexcusable that you're not at least in the top 5, if not top 10, if not top 5 in the country of doing this. And, at the same time, it just kind of comes to, the coaching staff at the end of the day. Now granted, Penn State has had some linebacker depth issues throughout the season. They didn't have Tony Rojas, unfortunately. But at the same time, it's just, you sit there and you say to yourself, there's only so many different reasons and different excuses at this point for them to do this as well. And, Penn State has had the same weaknesses over and over. What's their weaknesses? Okay, they haven't had a good receiving core. K'Ron Hudson, Devontae Ross, and Traber Pena, they played 130 snaps and they couldn't find a way to get to them. They couldn't find any way to get separation in UCLA versus UCLA, or really for that matter in the College 12 playoff or versus Penn State. And then obviously we can talk about just the lack of big game success for James Franklin. If I could sit there and say to myself, okay, there's a number of coaches that I can rattle off right now that have more top 10 victories than James Franklin. If you want to look at this list here that I have in terms of records versus top 10s, Steve Sarkisian is 7-17 versus top 10 competition. Kalen DeBoer is 6-1. Josh Harple's 3-6. Marcus Freeman's 5-5. Lane Kiffin's 5-11, and Shane Beamer's 3-4. And James Franklin is 4-21. So to have all those coaches being able to get as many or more top 10 victories, it's just, you just sit there and say to yourself, at what point can you continue to make excuses for James Franklin? And I think James Franklin is a phenomenal coach. I think he's a great guy. There's a reason why people at Penn State and such as myself love him and defend him all the time. At the end of the day, he is born and raised in the area. He's had a ton of success at Penn State. They've had 10 plus wins for the past couple seasons, but I think we're getting to the point now with Penn State where I think they do legitimately need to have that conversation in terms of have they hit their ceiling with James Franklin? And I think, quite frankly, there is a very good reason to believe that. Now, granted, I think you have to see the rest of the season through and kind of see where the chips lie. Because I don't think this season is completely over for them, right? Like I said, you still have to play Ohio State and Indiana. You face a pretty weak Northwestern team that they should take care of, but let's not jump to conclusions here. But all I'm getting at is through this whole sort of rant or spiel or wherever you want to call it, it's very convoluted in terms of why Penn State is struggling. They have offensive line issues. Drew Aller hasn't played to their ability. The playmaking, the play calling, and I mean Andy Kalinecki, I've criticized him before, and I think it was on display the last 2 weeks in terms of some of those crunch time decisions. And also when you pay someone like Jim Knowles that much money to come over, you expect a top 5 defense in the country. So for that to not really come together and for UCLA to run and throw all over that defense, it's just quite frankly just unacceptable. And I don't really know what you go from here if you're Penn State. The only thing you really have to keep in mind is if they do hypothetically agree to part ways, I think it could be a good thing for James Franklin to have a change of scenery and a change of pace for him. However, when you look at this coaching cycle, the only job that for me would really make sense for James Franklin to leave for is Florida, especially given the SEC connection that they have, assuming that Billy Napier doesn't make it. I mean, granted, I think there is a scenario where James Franklin could possibly save his job for another season. So I don't necessarily want to ride that ship quite yet in terms of that happening. But there's just no other real job openings that I think are going to be open. Now, granted, maybe the Auburn job, if the Auburn job continues to go south with Hugh Freeze and everything, so maybe that could happen. I mean, Auburn, granted they definitely have the resources there to be able to support James Franklin, but when you have the expectation like they do in the SEC, it's going to be the same conversation over and over again. And I think a lot of SEC fans would push back on James Franklin, giving that kind of background that you have on him. But a lot of people have been talking about this, and rightfully so. And that's been one of the big storylines in all of college football. But at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, obviously one of the worst losses that you can really possibly ask for, given the situation that they're in. But, when you owe a guy $50 million, you're not going to fire him overnight. He doesn't deserve to be fired. It's just more or less of how do you continue to build momentum? How do you keep moving this forward? And how do you keep making sure that this team, and most importantly, the recruits that you're going to be hosting for the rest of the season, believe in the program and believe in the vision